Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. We are going to use mics up here just so that we can be picked up by the recording, and also you can hear us a little better. Thank you all for coming. My name is Bob McClellan. I'm the college counselor at SES, and we've got a great panel lined up for you. I've got a bunch of questions I'm going to start it off with, and then we'll open it up to you all. But I'd like to let my panelists introduce themselves, and we'll do ladies first.
Hello, my name is Emily Reynolds. I am the admissions counselor at Belmont University for all of East Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. So very familiar with this area. I have been in admissions at Belmont for a little over 2 years. I graduated from Mississippi State University in 2020. It was a weird year to graduate, to online graduation. So after that, I did a 1.5-year internship at a church in Oxford, Mississippi. Worked a lot with high school and college students and kind of felt like, okay, college, high school students, that's who I really enjoyed working with. And so decided to make the transition to higher education and have absolutely loved Belmont and Nashville.
Hey folks, Alan Ramirez. I'm the Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at the University of the South. Have you heard of it? It's right this way there. So this is my 3rd year at Sewanee, and it's just been, it really has been a fun ride. It's not over yet. But this is Sewanee, for those of you who aren't familiar, I would love to have you on campus. We're a premier liberal arts institution that has been nationally ranked for decades and decades. So offering a premier education that individual attention in the classroom, but also offering faculty from the top of their field. So that sort of access that Sewanee has right down the road is incredible. And what I love about SAS is that students have that opportunity to have that dual enrollment opportunity to enroll in courses at the university and get that course credit. So really love that.
Yeah, I feel a little like I'm reliving my dream of being like an Oprah Winfrey or Phil Donahue or something. It's kind of fun. I've never really done this, but it's kind of fun.
We do live in 2 ferns.
So. The ferns, right? The chair.
It's a fun look.
Which I had the whip though, a little bit. So both of you trying to touch on this a little bit, but I thought I'd just start with, why did you enter the admission profession? What brought you into this profession? Let's start with Emily.
Sure. So I think this applies to a lot of people who are in higher education, but I worked as a tour guide and I did an internship in the Office of Admissions at Mississippi State. So I had about a semester of internship credit that I had to get, and so the Office of Admissions was a great place to just gain that credit and make connections. And so I really just felt very energized by that. It was just such a special time to get to connect with families and hear about students' passions and just really relate on a personal level. So just that people aspect of work, it just makes going to, being a tour guide and doing those tours very meaningful, and then translating into a profession that just makes every day really meaningful and rewarding. And so I did touch on just how I had experience with students during my time in ministry, and the college that I worked with was Ole Miss and the University of Mississippi in Oxford. And so just getting connected to that campus, I was really not aware of how many jobs existed in the higher education profession. Just getting to connect with people in various offices on campus was a great learning experience. And so that's kind of what got me into the admissions profession, and what keeps me going is really connecting with those students and families and getting to be a part of a really important part of a student's life.
Yeah, I think there's not really a major that prepares you for higher education or administration or admissions, but I think the best preparation is being a tour guide. So if you're a tour guide here at St. Andrews or an ambassador, that's certainly something we look for in the admission office, because we know that, they show well, and they know how to showcase their institution pretty well too. So I was a tour guide in college. I had 2 jobs consistently throughout college, and then went on to seminary, and I was a seminary dropout. Me and Jesus are still good. However, it is. I realized, this is just not the real calling for me, and so started recruiting for my alma mater. I was a road runner from traveled all over Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana. Would leave campus on Sunday, come back on Friday, but met tons and tons of families, and there's something to be said about connecting with a student, and you see that hope, that opportunity in their eyes of what is to come, what they want to become, and who they hope to become, and so connecting them with that college career, that college pathway, that institution is absolutely part of it, and that's that life-giving sort of component to the work.
Thank you. Now to some questions. What changes have you seen in the admissions process over the last few years, and what changes do you potentially see ahead, particularly maybe the Supreme Court ruling and other changes you might see coming, particularly that will impact potentially the junior class? We'll start with Alan.
Yeah, so with the Students for Fair admission, that lawsuit against UNC Chapel Hill and Harvard, that essentially, that case, race and admission has been in legislation for a long time. McWhorter, we've got Fisher, there's so many different instances, and so this is really the first time it really got just slashed. So you have some states like Michigan and a variety of other states that haven't been able to use race in the evaluation process. So and what I mean by that is there are some institutions that they're looking at the composition of their incoming class and the overall composition of the student body. So how is the student body reflective of the world and the nation we live in, and making sure that there's that opportunity for all. So with that, this is the first cycle of that no longer being a point in the application. So Common App still offered it as a field on the application. So Sewanee, we are exclusively Common App. So you go onto the National Common Application, the Common Application, excuse me, and you can apply to over 200 different colleges. Not that they're going to, right? It's not advisable. It's not advisable. But you can use the same application and apply to all these colleges. Well, that part is still there, but for us as institutions, we suppress that information. So we didn't know a student's ethnic background, that piece, unless they shared it. And Chief Justice Roberts talked about it in his opinion. He said this should not be a narrative on the student's lived experience, so on and so forth. They can still talk about it in their essay. Well, there's a loophole. And we saw some students do that, but we were expecting, this past summer, oh my gosh, so many students are gonna either misrepresent themselves, or they're gonna over-talk about it, and we really didn't see a ton of students talk about it in the essay. We saw a handful of counselors use it in their recommendation letter, but my point being here is that is one of the shifts, that is sort of like the little chips at the system in which with higher education, what I talked about earlier, what gives me hope is that college degree is that first step in towards that future, right? That future, whether you want to be that brilliant architect or engineer, but for my family, like that is the thing that really changed the pathway for us, changed the composition of our family tree, was higher education. Second generation college graduate, and if it wasn't for that, so things would look entirely differently. So I worry about that as we look at, how are we making sure that higher education is accessible? certainly affordable, but most importantly accessible. And so I'm talking way too long, but you've got on top of that now the delays with the FAFSA. That we're seeing more than 1 million students opting out. They have not submitted the FAFSA. Less, 1 million less students. Let me rephrase that. Less students submitting the FAFSA. So that tells us that's more than just demographic shifts. That's more than just population shifts. That is students opting out of that affordability piece for the college landscape.
Would you like to add?
Yeah, I think you definitely touched on just kind of changing perspectives of higher education. So that is something that we do see just increasingly among students with in terms of affordability and just, am I really getting a return on investment? I think students are very cost conscious. That's what I've heard from a lot of counselors that I've spoken with, and rightfully so, just making sure that they are making a great investment. And so I think just knowing the value of higher education and understanding how that's going to set students up for a great career and to really hone in on their passions and get those social aspects and the mentorship and support. They're just changing perspectives about that within the past couple of years. And so I definitely see us on the college end just making sure that we are communicating what really matters as part of the admissions process, as part of the college search. And at Belmont we are a medium-sized liberal arts institution, and we focus not only on academics but also what we call whole person formation. And so we're really making sure that students leave college with the academic skills, with the social skills, with, again, the mentorship and support to really set them up for success. And so just leaning into those resources, I can definitely see that being a bigger priority amongst us as colleges and communicating that with all of you guys.
Great. So the next question I have has to do with test optional. For those of you who don't know, there's a big push in the world and a very moving scale about admission, use of test scores in admission. There are many, many schools, over 2,000, that are test optional, test free, but there are also schools that consider testing in the admissions process. And we'd just like to get your opinion on test optional and does it work? For those students that have test anxiety or don't feel the test very well, does test optional work? And could you just expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I think this fits in really well with kind of the changes in admissions. I remember I did an ACT camp in Mobile, Alabama. I went down with my dad, and I had the big ACT book, just like going through all of those tests and timing myself and doing all of that. So I remember that being a really huge component of my own admissions process and being like a big requirement. And so I am really glad to see that test optional has become a big thing amongst a lot of institutions. At Belmont, we have about 50% of students who submit with test scores and about 50% who do not. So for our students who do test very well, we certainly always encourage students to submit those scores, but we know it will never penalize them if they do not submit their scores to us, if they have done really well in the classroom, if they've taken lots of rigorous courses, if that is where they really thrive. Some students just have different skills when it comes to test taking and when it comes to the classroom. So I think being test optional really gives students the opportunity to show their unique skills and not be kind of defined by the hard lines of what standardized testing has had to offer.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much more I can add to that. I mean, what you've got right now is, I think, with the New York Times, Bob, just last week, you pointed out a really good point. Like New York Times, if you look at the editors there, the vast majority of them are Ivy League graduates, right? And so they'll continue to talk about, when you read in the Times, as it relates to college admissions, they're going to keep pointing to those institutions. And so the rumblings and the murmurings about test optional, they keep pointing to those institutions. That is such a small segment of the overall higher education landscape. And so it's not really a fair representation. However, as we get further and further removed from 2020, we are going to see more institutions requiring scores, right? Because what happened is institutions, so Sewanee, we've been test optional since 2008, right? It was a deliberative process. There was a committee with faculty, administrators, and to really make sure that we were capturing and making sure that the admission process was accessible. So with that though, in 2020, you've got this huge shift and swing where from the top down, there was a ton of schools that just went test optional just like that. And they had no idea how to manage it, without a holistic evaluation process, right? And so what I mean by that, for us, we define holistic in that there's not one thing a student is admitted for, and certainly not one thing that they're denied for, right? So it's not just test scores, it's not just GPA, it is the composition of the application. So as you look at the landscape, there are going to be more institutions going test optional. I think as you prepare and you go to colleges, you're going on these campus tours. I think a critical question for you to ask is what we train admission counselors to share is what's our mid-50 percentile on the ACT, on the SAT. Well, the challenge with that is Belmont 50% test optional, Sewanee 47% of the incoming class were test optional. So that skews the data increasingly. And so it misrepresents the composition of the pool. And so, all right, great. So of those students that enrolled that went test optional, can you give me a sense of the GPA and what's the correlating scholarship, right? I think that's the next push to make sure there's some transparency there. We just awarded our top scholarship at Sewanee, which is the Benedict. Two of those scholars went test optional. And it just, so I think there's incredible value there because I think the progression of a student's academic journey, so freshman, sophomore, junior year, that progression gives me a far better picture of a student's capability and capacity academically than just how well you did it for 2 hours on a Saturday morning.
So we just talked about test scores and Alan mentioned rankings, which we all sort of are conscious of at some level. How do you suggest students look at colleges without considering the rankings? What makes a college successful beyond graduation rates and job placement? Alan?
Yeah, I would point to, I am not a fan of U.S. News and World Report or anything to that extent, or any of those rankings. Wall Street Journal's getting into the rankings business. They're trying to really cash in on that market. Forbes as well. So I think if your college search is dependent upon a list or variables that stack to that extent, then I would really question what are you looking for in that college experience. However, U.S. News and World Report has changed their algorithm, and there's another university in Tennessee that was not happy with that changed formula. However, it was helpful in the sense that it moved towards a more social mobility measurement. And so how many of your students enrolled that were Pell eligible or from...
Alan, could you explain what Pell eligible is real quick? Just in case nobody's aware of Pell, that term, Pell eligible.
Pell eligible, so families that, so the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, determines the family's contribution to their student's education. If that student aid index, which is that number that's produced at the end of, after submitting the FAFSA, if that index is less than $5,000 or $6,000, then that means the student is eligible for a Pell grant. So it's a federal grant. At one point, decades ago, that was enough to help pay for college. It is now essentially just a $6,000 grant. However, it is a signifier of significant financial need, right? Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So how many Pell eligible students are you enrolling? But not just enrolling, are you progressing them and graduating them in 4 years? So there's that piece. So again, the composition of your pool or your class, but then are you delivering on the promises you made? Are you graduating them in 4 years? So I think that's a benefit. And then, but most importantly, the retention, not just first year to second year, but thereon after. So Sewanee, we have the Sewanee Pledge. We guarantee you're going to graduate in 4 years. Now, the caveat is that's with one major, and then secondly, you've done everything that your advisor and the faculty have asked you to do, right? So with that, it makes sure that there's that assurance that, okay, I'm going to do this in 4 years. We as a family can budget for 4 years. We can plan for 4 years. So I think that's a big part of that decision-making process beyond just the rankings. But look at the variables of what is weighted within those rankings. It'd be shocking. 20% of that valuation goes to peer assessment. So the provost, the president, and the dean of admission get a survey across 2,000 institutions. And we give a vote towards other institutions. Do you really think that a ranking should value my vote of another institution that much? But it does, and that's where I think the whole ranking system is flawed, and it's a bit troubling.
I know colleagues who have received gifts from other schools trying to move themselves up the rankings. Like they'll send the little gifts in the mail. Thank you, here's something. Just vote us a little higher next time. Would you like to add?
Sure. I just would add that every student has a unique set of needs and a unique set of passions, and every student is different. And so when looking at the college search, the admissions process, that's really where the school counselor relationships are very valuable in helping you all determine where you would like to go, what is a great fit for you. And I think job placement rate, graduation placement rate, those are all great indicators of success, and those certainly should be taken into consideration, but also getting to hear students' stories from those schools. When you're looking into schools, seeing where students are working, what industries they are in, what kind of seems like the fit for students who are graduating from that school. But I would definitely say past the rankings and all the placement rates and things like that, just knowing what you want as a student and what you are looking for that is most important to you, and going off of what you feel will be a great fit for what you want to pursue, and seeing how a college can really meet your needs.
Bob,
Go ahead.
I think beyond the traditional rankings, look at niche.com, niche, whatever you want to call it. It takes into consideration exactly what Emily is saying. So student evaluation, right? Their happiness, their satisfaction with their student experience. And so it takes in those variables as well as some of the more obvious pieces of placements and retention and graduation. So all that compiled. So it's a great resource as well to use in your college search.
Thanks. So we all know that high school students are busy, but perhaps you could speak about the importance of student engagement, involvement in school life outside the classroom, whether it be summer jobs, summer employment, summer camp work, just that involvement outside of, in our case, the SAS day.
Definitely. I just absolutely love advocating for involvement outside of the classroom. We have a lot of things at Belmont that we consider to be really strong leadership skills. So not just the big ones that you think of, like SGA, student government, student council, things like that, but also part-time work, like you mentioned, summer jobs, family responsibilities, doing different clubs and organizations, maybe starting your own clubs, having a hobby that you really enjoy. I think those are great ways to not only make friends, but also build up that leadership, leadership is really important to us at Belmont and just in college in general, just developing the sense of who you are as a person, what you are kind of dream of, what you're passionate about, just developing a strong sense of your unique identity and how you can best fit into your group of students, be a leader. That's something that starts in high school, and having the support in high school and getting all of those kind of involvement organizations is just a great jumping off point for growing your leadership skills in college.
Alan?
Yeah, I think the resume section, if you're managing towards that resume or activity section on the application, I would also second guess your involvement, right? So if you're doing it because it's going to look good on your college application, then recognize that we see that. It's more obvious than you would think. Because if you're just doing surface level pieces or can't really speak to the depth of that involvement, I wouldn't say you're wasting your time. I would just say, gosh, couldn't you have used that elsewhere into maybe something that you're really passionate about? So, for example, there's one application we read several years ago, but he was really passionate about video games. Okay, as a parent of a 9-year-old, I don't want him so passionate about video games. I don't want him just having that be his life. However, the student that had applied really tapped into that interest, right, and started learning how to code, how to do all these things. And so when you look at the summer pieces, like find ways in which you can really dive into those areas. You're like, gosh, I'm really curious about this, right? Well, let's find a way to learn more, expose yourself to more. I think being here in Sewanee, you have access. Being in a college town, you have access to college departments, academic departments, and leaders in their field. So if you're interested in the sciences, or especially in environmental science, or forestry, you will not find, I promise you will not find another institution that has the resources and the depth of knowledge that the University of the South has, particularly in those areas, right? And so if that's of interest, great, let's start having that conversation, right? So again, tap into the questions, right? The questions that lead to those curiosities, and really dig into that more, because what you're doing now helps shape what you're doing, what you will pursue in college.
One of the things we always talk about is depth over breadth. Get involved in some things and stick with it. Don't sort of piecemeal things together as you move forward. The next question has to do with campus tours, and I've been on a lot of them. My wife jokes that I could probably go on any campus and give the tour for the tour guide. For instance, the library has one floor, it gets quieter as you go up. It's open 24 hours a day during finals week. There's a 24-hour escort service, you need to get back and forth, right?
Have you heard about a blue light system?
Yeah, blue light system. You heard about a blue light system? If you're while college tours are important, I wonder if you could give some tips about all the tours you've gone on. What advice would you give students and parents touring the campus? What would you tell them? What would be some advice and tips? Let's start with you, Alan.
Yeah, I would always say be mindful of when you visit, right? So if you're going to visit a college in Vermont, maybe February isn't the time to go. Particularly for those of us Southerners that don't like 2 feet of snow. So there are phenomenal colleges up there. So be mindful of when you visit, as far as the time of the year for weather, but then also when you visit for the activity on campus, right? For the university's spring break that was just recently, we had droves of families visiting campus because they were also on spring break.